Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another interesting lecture on TOEFL. Alright. So students, let's start this lecture number. It's lecture 10. Alright. And what were we talking about? You remember? Yes, we were talking about methods, right? Methods for? Alright, methods of learning or no, teaching foreign languages. Alright, so we are students of which course? TOEFL is our course, and these days we are talking about what? Different methods, and the last method was the silent way. Alright, so that was the method and started in the last lecture, and today we will continue this method and we will see that how effective this method is and what is the role of teacher, the role of student, and particularly how learning of language takes place in this method. So students, let's start as usual. Yes, what do we do, by the way? Who would tell me? Yes, first we review the previous lecture. What was the last lecture? Lecture number 9. And what did we do? We started the silent way. What is silent way? A method in which we teach language and the learner learns English, for example. Yes, or we are of course trying to teach students English. How? Through which method? The silent way, in fact. So this is the method. Let's see what happened in the last lecture. What did we talk about? A brief review of the last lecture. Some students raised a question that, you see, the principle that we discussed last week, they are a bit confusing and students need more elaboration, in fact, on that. Let's see. I can review the principles. You must have read your text, and maybe you have found the principles which need more details. So I'll try to give you details today in this review lecture. So what was the basic concept in the silent way? Yeah, that human is creative, right? We create new things, right? We create novel ideas, novel utterances. So in the last method, we see that of course we teach language. How? Through drills. See, as we saw in which method? Audio-lingual method. That habit formation, right, is an important means. That once the teacher teaches language, so he teaches in such a way, he gives drills, practices, repetition, so that learning becomes habit of the learner. So we saw that, and we also saw that language is acquired through how? Through repetition, through imitation, and through reinforcement. So that was the ALM, audio-lingual method, that you see, teach language in such a way that it becomes a habit of the student, and they would not think, right, of their L1, and they would think in the target language. And how can we achieve that? We can achieve it through continuous practices, repetitions, and drills. That was ALM, in fact. So again, now, since in 1960 that of course idea was challenged, that language learning is not that habit formation, rather it is rule formation. So this mimicry, memorization, repetition, and parrot learning do not lead to real learning, in fact. This is what the basic concept in the silent way. What is that? That is, the humans are creative. We are creative people. Fine. And we have to create novel ideas, different situations, right? I mean, in our day-to-day conversation, day-to-day practices. So we, in fact, visit different places. We have to interact with different people. So we cannot rely on certain patterns which our teachers, in fact, taught us in the classroom. So then, I mean, again, we will be dependent on those patterns that we have learned. And how many patterns would a teacher teach? Right? So that's why the ALM was the challenged in favor of the theory that what it is, language learning is not parrot learning, right? That is not the real learning, in fact. And of course that the theory behind ALM was behaviorism. So that was the concept. And again, we saw in the method initially that language is not confined to a limited number of structures. Like we saw in ALM that they were the patrons. In fact, I mean, I am going to post office, and then the teacher changed post office with the bank, but the pattern remained same. So again, we saw that language is not limited to certain structures with the teacher gives. Again, and of course, opposition to which thought? Structuralism. From which theory? Structuralism, students. So the best evidence for it, students, we see what the children make, in fact, many sentences in their early life. So language learning is not what the outcome of habit formation. It is the process of creative rule formation. So this was the concept. Of course, in the silent method, that of course language is not that we learn some structures and again we practice, like we give some drills to the students and students will learn. However, the language is what? It is a rule based, in fact. Of course, language learning, what the learner keeps on making some hypothesis and then he checks the validity of the hypothesis. If he feels that his statement brings the desired response, so his hypothesis is valid. And if he feels, if the speaker feels that his whatever he has said could not bring the desired response, so the hypothesis may be invalid. So this was the basic concept we saw in the last lecture. Also we talked about this generative transformational theory. Which theory? Generative transformational theory, in fact, GTT we call it. And who gave this theory, students? Noam Chomsky. Who is Noam Chomsky? Linguist, right? American linguist, in fact. In 1957, this Noam Chomsky gave this the theory of generative transformational theory. And what is it? It's a model for the description of all languages. So what is the theory, in fact? The crux of this theory is that grammar is the native speaker's knowledge of language. It is not something which is written, that we have a textbook. Of course we have the grammar books and all that, but Noam Chomsky feels that the grammar is something which is in your mind. That is the native speaker's knowledge of the language, in fact. So that is the theory of generative transformational theory. So again, Noam Chomsky believes that this competence is different from performance, which is the actual use of language by individuals. What is a competence, in fact? Again, John Lyons says that competence is the knowledge of the language. And which knowledge? Again, the knowledge that you have internalized, right? Of course, when you are a native speaker of a language, you speak Urdu or Punjabi or Pashto, you don't know the rules of that language, but you have internalized those rules. How? By speaking, by practicing, by exposing yourself in that environment. So that is what the grammar is. The grammar, what is the grammar? Again, that is what the grammar that you have internalize into students. So this was, again, Noam Chomsky talks about this with competence and performance. And of course, performance is the use of the language, right? So if somebody has the competence and the performance, so the person is, in fact, the person uses language confidently. Is that clear? So again, for Ferdinand de Saussure, he is a Swiss linguist. He also gave this langue and parole. Now what is langue, student? Again, language, and of course parole is performance. Is that clear? Idea is almost the same. So what is the langue? the language, in fact, that of course the speaker has the language, the learner has that, of course the speaker of a language that he has internalized, that he has absorbed by living in an environment, and again role is what? The performance of the language. So that is Noam Chomsky says the competence and performance, and dissociates which one? Lang and parole. So this was, of course, we talked about in the last lecture. All right, now move on. Do you want to have summary of principles as well? Yeah, some students, I mean, of course, had some students, in fact, they are of the view that they could not understand those principles. So I just want to give you a summary of these principles briefly, in fact. So can you try yourself? All right, try it. Okay, teacher starts from familiar to unfamiliar. Okay, good idea. Anything else? I mean, that you have discussed that from known to unknown. All right, students, good. Let's see, quick review of the principles of the silent way. Yeah, the teacher goes from familiar to unfamiliar. Remember that when the class begins, when the class starts, what happened there? You see, the teacher, in fact, points to some sound, and the student, in fact, initially he points, fine. Again, he takes a pause, remains silent. Then he points again to those sounds, and there is a silence. And then he says A, and the student move on. A, O, I. See, so students, in fact, mean move on with those sounds. Is that clear? So definitely the student have, I mean, whenever, of course, the languages have some, of course, features, the common. So one of the common, of course, feature is what? That sounds of the languages are the common. So that's why when you start moving from familiar to unfamiliar, so we start with the sounds, as we saw in the proceedings, in fact. So see, from that L2 sounds which are familiar to L1 sounds. Another principle is, students, what is that? The teacher speaks very little, that we saw that, right? Teacher remains silent. He speaks only when needed. Which method? The silent way, right? So his silence motivates the learner to participate more and be active. Clear, students? You understand? So first, moving from familiar to unfamiliar. Second, teacher remains silent. He speaks only when there is a need. Is that clear? All right. Here, the third principle, student, the teacher is not the model, right? His gestures work, right? So students' self-criteria for correctness are emphasized. The student takes the responsibility of learning. See, the teacher uses his gestures, right, for ow, rounds the lips, in fact. So whenever there is of course, the alveolar sound, so the teacher, I mean, uses his gestures to help the students. He doesn't, I mean, of course, doesn't say anything. What he does, the teacher, he uses different gestures to communicate his, of course, the message to the learners, and the student get the message. Another principle is what? The student actions show if they have learned, right? When the students say, I mean, that the body language reflects that they have got the concept, they have learned that sound. So actions speak louder than the words. So when the student act, it shows that learning is there and learning is meaningful. Again, students help each other, right? So peer learning, of course, peer correction is there. One student helps the other, and again, this removes that psychological barrier that the student might have from their teachers. If the teacher corrects, so student might face it, in fact, might find it hard to face the teacher's correction. However, when the student correct, my dear students, so student to take it in a positive way. And then, of course, the teacher uses gestures and also L1 to help them learn. Another principles are, we talked about that students' familiar knowledge, old text, helps them to learn the unfamiliar. We had a discussion on that of course, moving from something that they know to something that they don't know. From A, example, then we can make a vowel glide, A, in fact. Clear? So, ow, Fine. So that's why from the old context what the student know, and moving from unfamiliar that they need to know or they intend to learn. Another principle is, students, that just since we have talked about these principles, so I'm just reviewing them quickly. Are you with me? Alright. So this principle says that reading is worked on from the beginning but after speaking, in fact. Clear? There are some word charts you have seen in the proceeding, that of course students, right, and the teacher points to the sound and also to those word charts. So also, I mean, reading is worked on from the beginning but after speaking, in fact. So mind you that here means speaking and then of course reading. And the teacher's silence, in fact, leads to students' autonomy. You know that when the teacher remains silent, it gives autonomy to the students, right? And this autonomy opens horizon of the student. This autonomy gives confidence to the students. This autonomy, in fact, helps students learn more, in fact. And this autonomy creates what? A congenial environment, a learning environment for the students. Another principle is that, of course, how we achieve meanings? Through perceptions, senses, not translation. You sense things, right? So you perceive things and then you try to what? You get the meaning. So how meaning is achieved? Through perceptions, senses, not translation. There is no, of course, that through translations meaning is not achieved. And there is group cooperation, of course, is the norm. Students cooperate, right? Even at the end we saw that the teacher gathers the students and he sits in the middle around a table. So again, that is, of course, there is a gathering around the teacher, and even the students help each other. So group cooperation is a norm. And little praise and punishment, of course, right? This is, of course, no praise, in fact. Here we some does, and then also if you see little praise or punishment, no. Fine, we won't see any much punishment. Fine, clear? So dear students, as far as the praise is concerned, little praise means almost no praise, and similarly no punishment. Errors are important. They are the road signs. If the student makes a mistake, fine, right? All students have some errors. So yes, errors help the learners to learn fast, in fact. So errors should be taken positively. When there are errors in the language of the learners, it shows that the learner is learning and his learning is. And if you see that a learner does not have any errors, so it means that maybe he's not learning, in fact. So of course the errors or the mistakes, they are the yardstick, of course, for the learner, that he is learning things. And again, another principle is that self-correction over teacher's correction, right? The teacher through his gestures makes students correct themselves, right? And even other students help in the correction, of course, in correcting the students. So dear students, that is what, if the teacher corrects, right, that may be, of course, a psychological barrier. But if student, of course, if a student corrects himself, that is, of course, better. So students listen to each other again, right? Fine. Of course, interpersonal communication is there between the students. So they listen to each other and they help each other, in fact. Now the principle is, students, what is learning rates at different, right? So rates are different, right? Of course, some are slow learners, in fact. Some take one small command and some students take what? Complex commands. And perfection is not the target, find you. Is that clear? Yeah, of course. The teacher encourages students to say, in fact, fine. See, he just creates environment. He paves the ground for the learning of that language. So perfection is not that he should be, of course, the learner should start speaking of word perfect language. So that is not the target. And the teacher frees his time by his silence, of course. Yes, when the teacher, of course, he's silent, right? The two students are working, so again he withdraws, right? So he lets students work, and students are attentive as well. Attention level is high. So students, these are some of the principles of this what do we call them, the silent way. And again, last two principles: with a bigger font size, meaningful practice is preferred to repetition. Yeah, again in ALM we saw there is much repetition, right? Teacher gives them drills and repetition and all that, but here practice, but meaningful practice, right? Of course the teacher, right, points to the sound and then to what? To the word chart, in fact. And even first he talks about the sounds, and then I mean we see that of course the Pedro, of course, right, Pakistan. See, so there are different sounds. Once the student in fact learn about these sounds, then of course the teacher can make use of those sounds. And then again there is a presentation, and this logical presentation of language from familiar to unfamiliar. This makes logic. If you start with something which is unfamiliar and you come back to that is familiar, so that might be confusing for the students. So what we do in this method, my dear students, yeah, we move from something which is familiar to unfamiliar. We saw in the method as well. All right, what is it? So autonomy is gained by exploring and making choices. Okay, and the principle is that students gain autonomy. They have what? They have their expression of thought. They have free will. They are not pressurized. And this learning is more fruitful learning, more meaningful learning. Fine. If the students feel that there is nobody to correct them, in fact, right? There is a person there who would help them out even without speaking. He only speaks when there is a need. Otherwise, through his silence, through his gestures, through his body language, he tries to encourage students. And again, feedback from the students inform the teacher. A very good point, in fact, that at the end, of course, the students give feedback, and this feedback, yes, it's useful for both for the teacher and for the taught. For the taught means that once they give the feedback, it vents their feeling. It helps them, of course. They expect better process of teaching in the next class, and also it prepares the teacher, right, to think of, to be more creative. Fine. To have a new drills, new techniques, if today's techniques in fact could not work. So again, or if he feels that the majority gives positive feedback, they were happy, they learned, of course, the concept, whatever the teacher wanted to teach, so then he might retain with that, he might go on with that. So this feedback, of course, it's really a good activity, and this the method when the teacher listens to all the students, that some students give positive feedback, some give negative feedback and all that. And then there is no homework. Sleeping practice, in fact. Yeah, you can sleep, you can close your eyes, and then you can see that whatever sounds you have learned is p, b, t, d, k, g, l, m, n, r, f, w, sh, y, shu, then ya, u, all these sounds you enjoy and you sleep and you practice. Yes, students, clear? Got it? So I think I gave you more time today for revision, right? So why? Because I thought this method was very important, and maybe, you know, when you read the text, right, while reading you might have find that, you know, I mean it's difficult to comprehend things there, in fact, right? Yeah, it is there, of course, this is the silent way. In fact, first of all, you might not accept it that how the teacher teaches silently, in fact. So now I think you have an idea that what the teacher does in this way, and how silence gives autonomy to the learners, and how silence in fact helps learner to learn this language, and how the teacher uses his postures, uses his gestures, maybe he uses his facial expressions, eye contacts, and he uses also, he tries to imitate, for of course, how to pronounce a sound's manner of articulation or the place of articulation. So through that he conveys, he communicates his message to the learner, and the learner get the message, right? And again we saw there was self-correction, and before that we saw that how this new method, of course, came into being in 1960 when the ALM was the challenge that language learning is not a habit formation, it is a rule formation. Why? Because we are human beings, right? We are creative. In fact, we have to communicate in different situations. So definitely the purpose of the language learning is to communicate with the people in different situations. So we cannot rely on the patterns. Again, structuralism, of course. So this has been, of course, the opposition of the both structuralism and behavioralism. In fact, you might be thinking that how it opposes structuralism, how it opposes this theory of structuralism. So my dear students, since that ALM talks about a pattern, right? There is a pattern, of course, and ALM, the method, of course, focuses on the pattern, and the method also believes that the vocabulary, of course, has a second priority to a pattern, to the structure. So this silent way, in fact, also you could say that opposes both behavioralism, right? Be behaviorist, and also what we call them structuralist. Clear, students? I hope you know these principles, in fact. And then again, go back. I gave you tick. Remember that? 10 important questions. How many of you have learned those questions? I asked you to learn those questions, right? Did you? I told you, my dear students, these questions should be on your fingertips. I hope you have done it. Yes? How many of you have done it? 40%. No. I want every one of you to do it. Right? These principles should be on your fingertips. Why, by the way? Well, because if you know these principles, then at the end of every method that we will talk about, you have to see these, you have to answer these questions. Right? So if you know the questions, only then you will be able to understand the method well. Clear? Like we talked about direct method, and then when you answer these questions, you will come to know that what are the roles of a teacher in this method, and similarly the role of the students. I hope you understand. So there are 10 questions, and I gave you a tip also. Example, GRI, GRC, right? So G for goals of a teacher, or role of a teacher and role of a student. C, characteristics of teaching and learning process. Then what? Interaction. I for interaction between student, interaction between student and teacher. And then what? F for feelings, how feelings of the students are dealt with. Fine. And also we saw what? L stands for language. How language is viewed, how culture is viewed, C for culture. And then we saw which areas of language, in fact, and which skills are emphasized, which areas of language are focused, and which skills are given importance, right? A for areas and S for skills of language. Then N, native language. What is the role of native language in this method? And then we saw how errors are handled. And finally, what is the evaluation process, evaluation procedure? Is that clear? You understand? So I hope you know these 10 questions. TIQ, 10 important questions. Please, you can learn these 10 questions so that you would be able to understand the methods of foreign language teaching. Is that clear? How many methods we have talked about so far? Who would tell me? First method was direct method. Then which method? No. Oh, first one was grammar translation method. Good. Second, direct method. Then which method? Audio lingual method. Then the silent way. Is that clear? Fine. Alright, students. So these are methods we have talked about. Now move on. Today's lecture. Any question, by the way? No questions. You got it? Good. So I gave you more time today for revision so that you would understand things. People had a lot of questions, so I thought I should spend half an hour today to just give you a review on the principles of the silent way, and I gave you these principles, and still I want you to go through your text, Google out things, read more from different sources, good sources, authentic sources, and then you will be able to to understand this method well. And again, once you will do all these things, so in your exam you will in fact attempt the questions well, and finally you will get good grades. Remember that. Fine. Why? Again, dear students, good CGPA is important, right? Good CGPA whenever you apply for a job. So this good CGPA puts you at top, in fact. Yes, students. So try to get good grades so that organization would hire you. Mind you, when you make your CV and you write 3 CGPA or 3+ CGPA, it gives you edge over those who could not have it. Clear? So yes, I know it's hard in this course particularly, but it is not impossible, right? It is very much possible. You can get it provided you put efforts. Fine, students. Yes? Alright. So here, who is this person? Yes, it's written there, of course, right? The creator of the silent way. Fine? See the picture? Good. Now, again, these 10 questions, we see how these, if you review the principles, that how, if you ask these questions, right, these are the 10 questions, of course, that we have just learned. What are the goals of teacher who use silent way? What do you think? Self-expression, of course, right? So student, in fact, when the goal of a teacher is to help students, right, express themselves, self-expression, in fact, right? And that self-expression, of course, means that whatever the content they have, the knowledge that they have, and also mean their sounds. So that's why, of course, once the teacher remains silent and the student are given chance, so they can express themselves well, right? Because if there is no pressure, no psychological pressure, no teacher's pressure, so it, in fact, it creates a good environment for the learner to express himself. So this way, in fact, the goal of this method is, the goal of the SW is to help the learner express himself. And is that clear? We need to create those grounds for the self-expression of the learner. So this is what the goal. And also, inner criteria for correctness, in fact. Again, I of course, the internalized grammar, in fact, like hypothesis that we keep on making, in fact. And that would be, of course, important point in this method, that yes, that like in the last we saw what it is, a habit formation, but here we see in the silent way that yes, inner what criteria for correctness. The student should develop that, right? That is the native speakers, of course. Like if you refer to Noam Chomsky, we discussed earlier, he says that grammar is the native speaker's knowledge of the language. So that's why, you see, the silent way, the goal of silent way is to develop the inner criteria for correctness. Student would, right, think, and they of course they had a criteria in their minds for correction, in fact. This is the goal of the silent way. What is the goal, students? Self-expression. And again, to develop the inner criteria for correctness. Second, in fact, the role of the teacher and what is the role of the student. Yes, students. So the teacher plays a technician or engineer. See, of course, he remains busy with the sounds, he points and all that. And students perform activities. So that's why, of course, in the silent way, the teacher, in fact, he acts like a technician or an engineer. So his role is what? Engineer. Or what does engineer do, in fact? So is the case here. Engineer, in fact, does. So here the teacher's role is, the teacher plays the role of an engineer or technician, and the student's role, right? Active learners. Teacher, in fact, teacher is an engineer, he is a technician, right? And the students they are what? Their role is active. Fine. So students, third question, what is that? Characteristics of teaching learning process. Right. Which method? S way. What is it? So my dear students, if you see the characteristics or the features of the teaching learning process, so they are built up a whole set of sounds by which color? chart? Sound color chart. Is that clear? So that is the point. You see that when we talk about the characteristics of teaching learning, the process, so they are built on what? Sound color charts. And second, teacher gives situation, right? And of course from what happens, students? Teacher gives situation from where student can have a structure of language, right? I mean, teacher points to a from sound, then he points to the rod, right? And then again he points to, they points to a chart that sounds blue, so a blue chart. So what happens is a red rod, a blue rod and a red rod, right? So what is it? The teacher, he gives the situations, and from it the student in fact make a structure, right? So again there is practice of using new language. So this is what mean there are some characteristics of teaching learning process. So what happens, right? The point is the teacher, what teacher does, he creates situations. He gives a situation to the students, and the student, what they do, they make a structure. And then again the practice is there, of course we have seen. Another question is the fourth one, what is the nature of student-teacher interaction? And also, what is the nature of student-student interaction in the silent way? So, here mean, very simple, you all know it, the teacher remains silent, right? And students' cooperation is important. So, if you talk about the teacher and student interaction, so in this method, yes, the teacher remains silent in fact, right? Through silent way he communicates. Through his gestures he communicates. Otherwise he does not. He only speaks when there is a need, and therefore of course if you see that, hardly he speaks. Is that clear? So his speech is very, very limited to the students. However, the students' cooperation is more in this method. And again, how feelings of the students are dealt. So are responsible to help the students overcome the obstacles. If a student struggles in pronouncing a word, right? So what in fact the teacher in fact through his gestures, through his postures, through his in fact the techniques, like we said earlier, the teacher works as an engineer in fact. So through his techniques, right, he helps the teacher, he helps the learner, right, to articulate the sound if the learner struggles in pronouncing a sound. So that's why of course that feeling of the students, of course that the teacher helps them, motivates them to overcome their problems. And again there will be a feedback session in fact at the end of the class. That is also important. The feedback in fact, once the student give feedback, so it helps them to give their problems, right? It helps them to have, of course, to vent their feelings, and also once they give the feedback, whatever their problems are, they share with the teacher in fact. Again, how language is viewed, in fact, and what is the culture viewed. So language has its unique features in fact. So, and culture is always inseparable from the language. Clear? So again, the sound, talking about the language is viewed. So language starts with the sound, right? And again we see the Portuguese as well, the language one, right? So again how does the teacher start in this class we saw? So from sounds. So we see that sounds are common in fact. So when you start with sounds, so that gives you confidence that you are learning language. Which question is this? 6 now. Question 7, students, what is it? What areas of language are emphasized, and of course what language skills are emphasized. So which areas? Yeah, sound. Students have to acquire the melody of the language. So again, sounds. Even we start with the sounds, and again we start with the familiar sounds, and again from language. Which language? Language one. Like for example, if we teach English to Urdu speakers, for example, so that is what we see. What are the common sounds, of course, in these languages. Similarly, if we teach English to Arabic speaker, of course, then Arabic speaking person. So again, we have to see what are the common sounds in Arabic and English. So we can start with those sounds with the learner knows, and then you move on to those sounds which learner in fact doesn't know. Is that clear? And then again, the area we just focus was that what? Focus on the structures of a language, right? Structures, again through practice in fact, and making it meaningful, right? So structures are highlighted, and vocabulary, of course, again vocabulary, because there are word charts are available in fact. So vocabulary acquisition may be restricted in fact, because you see there are only a few, the commonly used words, our word chart is there, and the teacher points to those words. So we can say that vocabulary use acquisition is limited, and there is no fixed syllabus in fact. Fine, there is no fixed syllable for in this method. Then for this class that we have just seen, what is the role of students' native language, right? Yes, students. So yes, your native language can, of course, can be used to give instructions and can help them with their pronunciation and perception, right? We saw that, of course, that if one student helps other, right, in Portuguese, to the left he says, fine. So you see, though it's very limited, but native language can be used to give instructions, because we feel that if instructions in the target language cannot bring the desired response, so in the L1 they can be given. Evaluation how evaluation is accomplished. So again, teacher rely on what? Yes, teacher really give test. So their observation on students' learning process is important. Students just observe. There's hardly a test in fact. Fine. So only when the learner in fact gives performance, he speaks, so that is the test of his learning, that he is really learning the language. Otherwise there is no formal test. And again, teacher should not praise, right? Again, the point is, teacher should not praise or criticize students. Again, this is the way, like we said earlier, that limited punishment and criticism in fact. So in this way, of course, when the teacher just works as a technician, he is an engineer, so he just keeps on helping the students through his gesture, through his body language. So he does not in fact appreciate somebody, and even he of course does not criticize anybody. So there is no criticism, there is no punishment, and there is no appreciation for the good work the student do. And then how does the teacher respond to student errors? So teacher work with the students and getting them to self. This is important. Teacher does not give them a correct version of the answer. What the teacher does, he in fact just helps the students, right? So self-correction is there, because all learning is self-learning. So does the teacher do in this way, that what he does, the teacher, yes, helps students. If the student struggles in pronouncing a words, so again he just uses his gestures, and sometimes the other students also help him in fact. So it can be a group work in fact, that we saw that there is coordination among the students, and the teacher also helps the students to of course help them, getting them to self-correct. And if students cannot do it for themselves, teacher will lead them by supplying the correct answer. First, the teacher tries his best to help the learner correct himself, and if he fails, then of course the teacher can do that in fact. These were the 10 questions, students, that we try to answer. And now these questions, again I tell you, we should know the questions. They are important questions, right, for all the methods. So once you know a method, once you study a method, once you attend lectures on this method, then try to answer the questions. And that's why in every method you will find the questions, and the writer also has given the questions at the end of each method, and then answers are also given. So do focus on these methods, these questions, right? And I have given you a tip how to learn these questions. Now, which techniques and material, of course, is used in the silent way? Sound color charts. We saw that. Yeah, so there are blocks, in fact rectangular blocks are there, and we call them sound chart. So what happens, the color chart can draw students' attention. In fact, you see, you point to a chart and of course student, there is a sound. Fine, so that is the technique that we use. The teacher uses sound chart, in fact, and of course here the teacher focuses on what? The sound, how students should learn to pronounce words. And then also color chart can remind students what they have learned and what they yet to learn, because we have seen two things, right? On the chart you have seen that, well, there are rows of there are blocks. There are 3 rows of blocks at the top, and then there is a line. At the bottom we see another 3 rows of rectangular blocks are there. At the top, those blocks, they are, of course, there are sound charts, they are colors, they have different colors, and then those blocks are for vowel sounds. At the bottom, after the line, those blocks are for consonant sounds. So that's why once the students come to know about the vowel sounds, then the teacher comes down to consonant sounds. So first the vowel sounds, and then he comes to the consonant sounds. That's why, see, the consonants, and of course it can be the vice versa, in fact. Like if you start with the consonant sound and then you come to the vowel sounds, that can work also. And then the teacher's silence, also technique. The teacher remains silent. Why? In fact, the teacher gives help. And then is this, of course, once the teacher remains silent, then again the students gain autonomy, and that, of course, is a situation that helps in, of course, learning a language. Well, students, so we're talking about sound color chart, right? We just discussed that. Now moving on to teacher's silence. In fact, the why teacher remains silent in this method. So why? Because the teacher, in fact, wants to give a free hand to the students. Teacher wants to give autonomy to the students. When the student will have autonomy, so they can speak the language well, they can learn the language well, they will not have any psychological pressure. And you see a sentence, for example, take a rod, take a red rod, or take a blue rod, in fact. And then there is peer correction. One student corrects another student, in fact. So that is, again, when the students correct themselves, that, in fact, that encourages the students, in fact. Even the one who corrects, it's matter of encouragement for him, and also the one who seeks that that correction, in fact, the one who is corrected. So the corrector and the correctee, in fact, the person who corrects a mistake, who corrects an error, and somebody who enjoys it, in fact, who is the beneficiary of that correction. So it's encouragement for both of them. So again, this gives them encouragement, and there is a peer correction we saw in this silent way, and the relation is based on cooperation, not competition. One student cooperate with other. There is no competition that Ali has learned more and Zia has not learned, or Zia could not learn. No, there is just a cooperation, right? There is no competition among the students, so they just cooperate, and that's why we saw that of course this coordination is a norm in this method. So this peer correction, dear students, it is a good technique in the method, and it works well. It works well. It encourages the student, and it helps them, of course, to think positively in the class. Also, it helps the learners to consider everybody as part of the learning. And again, we see what the teamwork is there. Every learner feels the part of the team, and every learner feels that if the one student is learning the language, it means everybody is learning. So we see the teamwork, we see the coordination, right? And we don't see any competition in the class. So there is peer correction here. Then we saw rods are used, right? Different color rods are there that the teacher uses, of course, once he sits here in the middle of the class, and the students are around him. So to provide visible actions, in fact, or situations for any language structure. So that both mean once there are, rods are there and the rods are used in the class, right? So students in fact involve themselves in the language learning, and they really enjoy that activity, in fact. And again, the teacher of course remains silent most of the time. He just points to the dots and then to the sounds and then to the also word chart. See, so what happens? The teacher points to the sounds, again pronunciation, then he comes to the rod, a realia, an object, and then he moves to what? Also to the word chart that they have. Fine. And then these rods are used to teach colors, numbers, statements with propositions and conditionals. Of course, we use them, and they can also be used, of course, to be used abstractly as well. In fact, right? Of course, to give an abstract concept, these rods could be used, and then teacher can use rods to represent each word in a sentence or to elicit the sentence from the students. In fact, the rod can be used, right, to represent each word, right? Like we see the teacher also uses his hands, so he can use this rod to what? To represent each word in a sentence, right? Or to elicit what? The sentences from the students. And there is another technique, that is self-correction gestures. We had a discussion on that. The teacher puts his arms together, fine, and then he moves them outward to signal. Example, see, E, right? E or E, clear? So whenever there is a sound, the teacher uses his palm, right? And he, of course, that palm, of course, even it's a gesture for the student, either to in fact what? Either it is a long vowel or it's a short vowel. In fact, example, P uses lips also. Example, when there is a occlusion, B, T, right? D, K. So, K. He doesn't say that, but he does gestures, in fact. And then also teacher indicates what? Each of his fingers representing a word. Example, right? This is a class, for example, right? So, see, word, he points to a word, then he points to a second word. So, he uses his fingers also. So self-correction gestures are there. It's another technique which is used in this method. Again, we saw word chart are there. Yes, students, there are 12 English charts, containing more than 500 words, and these charts contain functional vocabulary of English. Yes, you may say that this can be, of course, a weakness, that the vocabulary is limited. For example, only the words, commonly used words, I have given on those charts, in fact. And then what teacher does with those words? The teacher points to the words in chart in a sentence to let sentence student read loud the sentence. Again, we saw that speaking comes first and the reading after that. And the way the teachers are, of course, when the letters are colored, helps the students with their pronunciation, in fact. So because every sound, right, there is a different color, right? So teacher points to that, example, P, so there is sound as well. So then there is a word pod, for example. The word is what? Polite, right? Kick, K. So in this way, what happens? That the teacher, in fact, points to the word in chart, and then he also points to that sound chart. In this way, the student not only learn that word, right, and then the sound, and again what teacher does, he makes a sentence, of course, right? So he uses again his fingers of his hand to refer to each of the word in a sentence. So again, speaking first and the listening, reading afterwards. We saw another technique is fiddle chart has been used also. There are 8 fiddle charts for learning English, for example. The teacher and the later students also point to those colored coded fiddle charts in order the students associate the sounds of the language with their spellings, right? Then here examples are given, for example, A, right, A, right? So here mean what? Say, with A, say. Then we have steak, for example, E, right? Sheep, right? Ship and what? Sheep. Clear? So here is what we have seen with the whale and way. Yes, students? So these fiddle charts are also used for in this technique. Then we also see that structured feedback is there, students, right? So what students make? Observations about what they have learned and express their opinion and comments to the teacher. Again, a very good thing, that at the end of the class, the teacher asks for feedback and the student give feedback. Yes, students? Yes. How about this, by the way? You think it's a good technique? Yes. All right. Why it's a good technique, students? Because once you give feedback, yeah, you can express your feelings. All right. Fine. You have freedom of expression. All right. Good. Yes, very right, student, of course, because at the end of the class, you realize that how was it? Was it very, very good, or was it so-so, or was it, very bad, right? So if the teacher gives you this liberty that you can express yourself, so that is really good practice, right? Because once you give your feedback, and that is immediate feedback, that at the end of the class, if you give the feedback, and we hope that the teacher would come prepared for the next class. Of course, when the teacher would come prepared, and then you would also put efforts as well. So this feedback, yes, again, it's important. And again, to give feedback, yes, you have to be attentive, you have to be careful, because you cannot give a wrong feedback. You can only give feedback if you have a valid observation. So for that, you have to be very, very active learner. So only then you can give genuine feedback. Otherwise, your feedback may not be authentic. Yes, students? So this is a very good thing that the teacher asks for the feedback, and the students give feedback. They talk about their feelings, they talk about their experience, whether it was good or bad. So this is really good. It helps the teacher to help you more in the learning the foreign language in the next class, and also it gives you a sense of satisfaction that once you have given the feedback, and of course you are a keen learner. So in the next class you will show more interest and you will sit in the class enthusiastically. Clear? So of course the teacher has to accept students' comments in a non-defensive manner. The teacher should not take it to his heart, so he should be polite, he should be honest enough, in fact, to listen to the comments, and he should not be defensive them. He should take it as, of course, as constructively. He should take this feedback constructively, and he should work on that. So of course this is a good thing that the feedback is there. So students, towards the end, today, what did we talk about? Yeah. So today, in fact, what did we do? That we, in fact, talk about we try to answer 10 questions, right, on the silent way. We talk about the role of a teacher, right? We also talk about the goals of the teacher, in fact, like goals, then the role, what are the goals of a teacher who uses the silent way, and we saw that the goal was self-expression. Remember that? Then of course the role of the student and role of the teacher. Teacher remains silent and student interact, in fact. Then we saw interaction between the teacher and the student. What was that, student? Yeah, between student and teacher it was almost no interaction, and between student it was maximum. Then we saw the characteristics of the teaching learning, the process, and of course in that we saw that the teacher, in fact, gives gestures, right, through his body language. He conveys his messages. So that was the learning process. And then again we saw that, well, that which areas of language are emphasized, right, and which skills, of course, are emphasized. We saw that listening, of course, is there, the speaking is there, in fact, and reading also is there, of course. And then, right, so these are some of the points that we talk about. So my dear students, the silent way can be used with elementary, intermediate and advanced students, in fact, right? So here you may comment on that how it can be used for elementary level. So generally, my personal opinion is that at the elementary stages, of course, at the early level, the children are good at picking these sounds, so you can, of course, you can help them learning. Why? Because at that time, you see that their mind is not, in fact, their mind accepts fine this second language, the learning, right? So at that stage, I personally feel that, well, this method can be a real success. And of course, it doesn't mean that it cannot work at the intermediate level or at the advanced level. If the teacher, in fact, is proficient, right, is well versed in using the method, so it can be used at any level. It can be used at advanced level. The method can be used at intermediate level, and also it can be exploited at elementary level. So for that, you have to have various techniques in your mind, and you have to be creative. And again, you need to know different gestures to communicate, and you need to be familiar with this method, ins and outs. And of course, its principles are far-reaching, of course, talking about the silent way. And it not only affects education, but the way one perceives the living of life. There are clearly implications for language teaching. So again, that we saw in this the method, of course, the silent way, that more encouragement is given to the students. In fact, they are encouraged to articulate, they are encouraged to speak, of course, and we saw there were, of course, though it was limited, but there was also focus on the vocabulary and the sounds and also the sentence making. So dear students, yes, the silent way is there, the method we talk about. Who gave this method, by the way? Caleb, get and go. All right, fine. So this is the method that today we talked about, the method, of course, the silent way for learning a foreign language. Now see, you try it. You can try this method. You're all practicing teachers, and you will be teachers, of course, inshallah, very soon. So once you will complete this course, so try this method. You can try it any level, see, and see how does it work. If it works, yeah. And mind you, of course, every method, I was reading a research paper somewhere, it says that, well, in a way, no method is an ideal method. Fine. It depends on of course, the teacher, how he makes that method a real success. So if you use this method, of course, if you are creative, fine, and if you do research more on this the method, the silent way, and you can find out that does it really work or not. And if it works, then of course, what is the output of the method, that is the silent way. So with this, right, we conclude today's lecture, the silent way. Here I want to give you that today, in the next lecture we will start another very important method. What is that? Guess. What is it? Suggestopedia. So students, thank you very much. Have a nice time. Take care. See you in the next class. Goodbye. Thank you very much.